Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. And I'm with Laura as ever, and we're doing one of our specials where we've come out of our own little studio and we've come to a place not that far from Brighton, just the other side of the Downs near Lewes, a place called East Hoathly. And we're with the artist Keith Pettit. Is that pronounced correctly?
It's funny. I grew up being an anglicised Pettit, and then
Pettit.
And then who was the French footballer that played? I can't think of his first name. Emmanuel Pettit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In the 90s, and as soon as that happened, I started being known as Pettit more and more.
So good.
But yes, no, I grew up with a very anglicised version of it.
We're going to talk about a specific piece, and as ever, if you go to the 7th-art.com website and click on the podcast button there, the image will come up, and also on our YouTube site. You may already be there, but then you can see the image that we're talking about. And I'm going to ask Keith right away to tell me about this piece, why it's named what it's named, and the extraordinary history, because I think we don't often do sculptures, and this is a most beautiful piece of work, and I'm going to ask Keith to tell me all about it.
So it is a figure. It is a figure carved from a piece of 5,500-year-old bog oak that I found from the Pevensey levels near here. So that has laid submerged for nearly 6,000 years.
And just, I'm going to interrupt you. Bog oak.
Bog oak.
Tell us what bog oak means.
So to be bog oak, what has happened is about 6,000 years ago, the sea was much, much lower, and the area that is now the Pevensey levels, which is a marsh, a drained marsh, was Wealden woodland with a stream running through it. And I suspect what's happened is with longshore drift that we see happening like at Cuckmere Haven now, because the Environment Agency has stopped dredging the river mouth. What's happening is the longshore drift that we get along the Sussex coast, the pebbles block up the river mouth.
Yeah.
And the flooding is sort of going all the way back to north of Alfriston, up the river valley. And
is that why Alfriston's getting...
No. That you have, even with the best will in the world, the heavy rainfall will cause flooding to the north of Alfriston, but it's being made worse at the moment because of this change in policy of dredging the river mouth. And it's really interesting to see, because what's happening is the river gets silted up with pebbles and it slowly moves westwards to try and avoid the blockage. It's fascinating to watch. And all of a sudden, to my eyes, it makes much more sense of the landscape. You can see a scalloped cut off of Haven Brow, which is the westerly first or last of the sisters. And clearly in history, where the river has wavered across the estuary, it's pushed right over to that eastern point, I beg your pardon, and eroded that. And then a storm has happened and the river has moved back across. And I suspect what's happened in the Pevensey levels, or the Pevensey levels as we now know them, that has happened. Yeah. And that river, that stream has got silted up, it's flooded back, and it killed the woodland that was on the lower levels. And that tree has died because it got submerged. And at some point, about 10 or so years later, it fell and got covered in silts. And then with the rising sea levels again, that area that we now know as Pevensey Marshes was an inland sea. And it buried all of these oak trees.
Just on that, you told me when we first met about how we have evidence that the Romans would have sailed in.
Yeah, so just to the north of
the Normans, of course, 1066.
So, yeah, absolutely. So this was I got from just south of Howsham, and just north of Howsham there is evidence in place names that there was certainly a quay or some sort of haven for boats to pull up, and what they would have been doing is the galleons would have been coming up from the Roman Empire to load up the ingots of Wealden iron. There's certainly a wharf at Boreham Street that is on the 5 metre line, which is about where the Roman coast was on the contour, and there is an anomaly or earthworks, and it is about the dimensions of a Roman galley.
Amazing.
And obviously, Ashburnham was one of the sites of one of the last iron foundries in Sussex. So, it blows me away that oak tree was underneath those silts as those Roman galleys sailed over the top of it. But already at that point, that piece of wood was 4,000 years old.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
And then you wind the clock another 1,000 years forward to the 1066 conquest, and William would have secured that whole area with his ships, and again the keels of Norman longboats would have sailed over that, and that was already, as I say, at that point that was 5,000 years
Is
old.
that? You can almost write a book, can't you,
blows my mind.
On the history now?
Absolutely.
Is it only specific to Pevensey? I mean, is it all? It has to be all around the country. Is there other places?
Well, certainly in Ireland, Heaney writes a lot of poetry about Bog Oak.
Okay.
And I know there's a guy up in Tunbridge that's built a whole business about drying and milling Bog Oak and selling it to high-end furniture makers. Yeah. And I think he sort of gets an articulated lorry load down from the Cambridgeshire Fens every year.
Okay.
So
right.
It's around.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I think people on the marsh that work the marsh come across it, but it's 6 feet down, and I've yet to meet anybody else that knows about this.
Right.
So you've got a tree which is buried for 6,000 years. How does it end up in your studio?
Like all these things, there's a story attached. So I left school and became a sign writer, and part of a sign writer's role is coach painting, and I still do a little bit of that. And I've had this ongoing gypsy caravan restoration, which literally I have been working on for years. Poor man has been very patient. It's very boring, very tedious and repetitive work, but I love being down on the marshes, which is where the caravan is. So it's an absolute treat to be on the marsh, and he's got quite a bit of land. And the other year he dug himself a huge pond, and in my lunch hour I was going over there the other summer, a few summers ago now, and having a swim in my lunch hour in the pond, and I kept coming across these hulks of timber.
Under your feet?
No, not in the pond, but just scattered around the field. And there was one particular one that was there was a hawthorn, so there was a bit of shadow, and I would sit on this log trunk under the hawthorn in the shadow in the summer and have my lunch. And sitting on it, it was really uncomfortable. It was really strange. It was really hard. And then I found some more in some scrubby blackthorn, and it just started. It was obviously oak. It was obviously very, very weathered, very seasoned, and they were huge. And it made no sense because this is marshland. You get scrubby willow, blackthorn, hawthorn. You get the odd oak tree, but nothing big. So there's all these huge hulks of timber, and it was like, where have these come from? And I spoke to the owner, and he informed me that it was Bog Oak, and he went, and I remember he's a bit of a wide boy, he went, Bog Oak, sculptors pay fortunes for Bog Oak. So I was very, very tempted.
Ka-ching.
Yeah, absolutely, very interested. And I looked into it, and basically it would have been worth a fortune if he'd spent 7 years very carefully drying it out so it didn't split. Then it would have been worth a fortune. But he just hoiked it out and left it laying in the field for 2 years when I found it. So we came to a negotiation, and basically I did 2 days of work on his gypsy caravan, and he brought me a lorry load.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that was how we found it. And it was, and the reason I was so interested in it was because I am born and bred, and I'm a local boy, and I've always loved my history. And I grew up right on the edge of the marsh, and I used to cycle on there and have adventures as a kid and go exploring for days on end, just lose myself down on the marsh. And you know, when we was kids, the beach we went to was Norman's Bay from Howsham, and my mum used to drive us down there in the car on those hot summer days. So it was always this place that I've always loved and still love. Yeah. So I'm aware of it. So I'm thinking, well, when did these oaks grow here? How? And I knew nothing about bog oak at this point. And it was then that I started sort of thinking, well, and I've already said, I knew that about 1,000 years ago, it was still a navigable sea. Tidal, I'm sure, but navigable nonetheless. So oak trees didn't grow then. And then I knew that further north from where I was there, Roman galleys were coming in to load up. So again, that's 2,000 years ago. They didn't grow then. It was like, wow, when have these? How? When? How has this happened? And I was on the internet. There is no mention of bog oak. You cannot find. Well, probably is now because I've been talking about it a lot for 2 years. But there was nothing then. And I was fortunate. I found an Oxford University record of an archaeological survey they did on the exact opposite corner of the marsh, down at North Eye. And again, I'm not academic, and I skim read it, and I found that they did core samples, and they found 6 foot down, which was about where these had come from, a heavy organic layer. Now, I can't remember whether they did pollen analysis or carbon dating or whatever, but they came up with a date of around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. So this is where I'm extrapolating that 6,000-year-old age from, is this survey in the other corner of the marsh. So that's how they came to be.
I was recently at Burling Gap, which, for those of you that don't know, is very close to what we're talking about on the coast. Suffers quite a lot of erosion. And in fact, there's a number of houses there which is now diminished because some have fallen into the sea, and I think they've just closed the visitor centre there, a cafe, because it's getting too dangerous. But there was a sign up giving a bit of history, and I actually stood and read it in detail. It's absolutely fascinating, and it talked about how in the Ice Age, which is only about 10,000 years ago, isn't it?
I'm not sure the last Ice Age, but yeah.
So it came south of London, but just the way in which these white cliffs were formed. And you realise, of course, the sea levels were much higher because it's all, sediment from aquatic life.
They're the coccoliths, because I did a sculpture once on Cookmere Haven. So they are the calcific skeletons of microscopic plankton that is just laid down in billions and billions and billions to make those white chalk cliffs.
Oh, that is.
But then they also have...
You can get like 60,000 coccoliths on the head of a pin or something.
Really?
No.
And yet
So
you've got these soaring cliffs that took billions of years of plankton dying.
And probably connected to France at one point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Split off.
So you can find layers of the flints.
Yeah.
They're like a fingerprint, or like how you see the strands of DNA laid out.
Yeah.
But you can find those same layers of flint corresponding to the North French. So these same layers.
Okay,
But these layers too, this sign actually says we don't really understand why at a certain point
The silica. Yeah.
there's this one horizontal layer of flint.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, what happened at that moment? Anyway, it's absolutely fascinating.
It is. And Burling Gap, if you look at the cliff right at Burling Gap, it's a different colour. It's very yellow. And that is because that area that is Burling Gap, and one of the reasons the coastal erosion is more accelerated there, is it's sediment laid down by the melting of the glaciers further north.
Oh, okay.
Right, okay.
Oh, it's so good. I love all this.
So we've just released... it's a re-release actually of our film Michelangelo, and there's a really nice sequence in that film which is all about Carrara and how he used to go to this extraordinary mountain where when they take off the surface layer they discover that it has this perfect white stone which is can be flawless, is perfect for carving but will last forever. I mean, it's just the most extraordinary thing. He would go there for months trying to find or hoping to find the block of marble. So it's a similar kind of thing. So you found your material.
Yes.
And you have brought it back to your studio. So we're sitting in your wonderful studio in East Hoadley, where you're not only a wood sculptor, and we'll talk about the wood prints as well, and so on and so forth. But you've brought this... One of the things I think that you mentioned to me before we started recording is that we shouldn't think of this as the trunk. This is actually
the root.
It's actually a root.
Yeah, yeah.
So what always, of course, impresses me about an artist like yourself is how did you see, in the same way as Michelangelo will look at a block, if you go to the Louvre and you see the unfinished slaves, there's 2 blocks of marble, which are, he hasn't completed them, but these 2 slaves or 2 human forms are emerging, but it was never finished.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's like you, what he's doing is reductive, so he's taking things away.
Yeah.
There comes a point of no return.
Yes.
You can't put the wood back on. You can't. Well, I mean, sometimes with stone you can glue things back together, but basically not. So tell me the process from a trunk with roots or just the root, 6,000 years old, lying on your studio floor.
Yeah.
How do you get to what I think is this most beautiful representation of human form?
The way I'm working with my sculpture at the moment, I've been working like this for, I don't know, 5-6 years now. And I had a real epiphany. I was working in Germany, and before I flew out, we'd come up with a design. And when I got out there and they presented me with the tree laying on the floor, I could instantly see that the heartwood was rotten. Mm-hmm. And I was planning to use the heartwood, and I sort of went, this tree.
You interrupt you again. Heartwood.
So the centre of the tree. So you've got heartwood, and I can't remember all the scientific names, and then you've got the sapwood. So the sapwood is softer, greener, and then obviously the Cambrian under the bark is where all of the sugars and the water travels up and down. So the heartwood is essentially the structure of the tree. But as trees get bigger, all of that wood becomes actually redundant, and also the tree is exhausting its nutrients in the soil. It can't get up and go shopping, it's there. Yeah. So it uses the nutrients in the soil. So when you get to veteran trees, what they will do is deliberately, the heartwood will start to rot. Now obviously that is rotting down and it's reintroducing nutrients into the ground, but it's also turning the tree trunk into a tube. And obviously a tube is much stronger than a bar and a solid because there's flex there. So when you see veteran trees, 400-500 years old at least, depending on the species, they're quite often hollow. Mm-hmm. So this particular tree had been infected, whatever, and it had started to rot in the centre. Now I was wanting to use the middle plank of this tree. So I said to the organisers, this tree is no good. And they basically just sort of shrugged their shoulders. And I had about 2 nights of complete panic and sleepless nights thinking, what on earth am I going to do with this? So what I decided to do was basically cut away the rot to see what I had left and then try and take the design forward. And what it did was the sculpture that we came out with at the end was totally different to my original idea. Yeah. But there was some magic there, the fact that I'd worked with what the tree was willing to give me. And it totally turned my head around and rethought how I was working. So rather than imposing my will upon the wood and just turning it into the literal, a substrate, what I wanted to do from there on in was try and work with the tree and see what the tree would give me. And this is what led to these torsos. I was lucky enough to get hold of a load of street elms, which have been pollarded through their lives. Now what pollarding does is the trunk maintains its growth, but then the top, which has been cut almost annually, is putting on new shoots all the time. So what you end up doing is distorting the tree, and it becomes huge at the top and a narrow trunk. So I had a load of these, and to my eyes, they looked like a male body because they had sort of a narrow waist and broad shoulders. And that started all of this whole male torso phase, I guess. So what I love to do is basically look at that piece of wood and try and see what's already in there. Now, with this particular one, it was, as I say, an inverted root plate. So it wasn't a pollard, but by turning the tree upside down, you still get the same effect, a narrow tapered trunk and a broader base. And I've inverted this. And to my eyes, I could see this leaping figure with an arm straight up and then the other arm leading forward. And to me, it looked like a ballet dancer mid-leap. So that was basically what I saw. Yeah. And this particular one, I struggled with initially because the leading arm was perfectly placed. It was just brilliant. But the trunk was root was really thin. So although you looked at it from the front and it was broad and it had the right weight for a muscular male arm, when you spun it round and looked at 90 degrees, it was like as wide as my hand, it was so thin.
Yeah.
So I agonised over that, and it just wouldn't flow. And of course, you're working with something with nearly 6,000 years old. You feel you have a sense of duty to do your best by it, because it's such a rare and finite thing. So I agonised over this, and I came back to it fresh eyes in the morning, and I fired up the chainsaw and I cut it off. And as soon as I did that, it flowed.
Yeah. But I love that line that you just said, that's what it gave to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That arm wasn't right.
And it's such an exciting way of working, because when when you're working from a sketchbook and you've been working out your sketch, the wood is completely mute. You are totally dominating and forcing your will upon it. And so essentially you're looking at your sketchbook, you're cutting. Yeah. You're looking at the sketchbook, you're making another cut. With this, I'm totally in the moment. I've got to be completely switched on to what I can see within the wood. So I cut a little bit off, and it, and taper the waist in a little bit, and try and find the pectoral muscles and take a little bit away, and just slowly tease out what's really already in there. And I find it's such an exciting and rewarding way of working.
I'm getting excited. Can we get some out?
Let me ask you a question. We're just right now making a film about Caravaggio, sort of looking into his, as we do with any of our artists in our films, how did they acquire the skills? And with Caravaggio, sometimes you don't know what studios they've gone through or how they've learned, and they seem to be relatively self-taught. But with Caravaggio, we know there's this studio, Pettizzano in Milan, and then we know the certain studios that he went to. And he's given certain tasks to begin with, including, for example, still lives, and basically works his way up to the human form. And they would have gone and studied human forms. They would have gone and looked at, in his case, the works of Raphael and Leonardo and Michelangelo. And now, I know that you started life as a sign writer. Digital world interferes with that. Go off travelling, come back. And I've seen your wood prints too, which are beautifully, the drawings for them. So how have you acquired, and are you self-taught as an artist?
Almost totally. Almost totally. I'm dyslexic, and there's also something else going on. I suffer from a stress. As soon as somebody is watching over me or trying to teach me, I have this stress which prevents me from performing at my best. I was doing a sculpture commission for the National Trust, and to work on the National Trust land, I had to have a chainsaw ticket. Now, I've been using chainsaws since I was a kid. I used to go fencing as a summertime job as a kid, and so I've been using chainsaws pretty much before I was even an adult. And I went and did the simplest chainsaw course. You can't get a more basic chainsaw course, just so I could have a ticket, just so I could go and do this project. The examiner had to take me to one side and go, "Keith, we're not trying to fail you here." So I have a real problem with being taught. It really has handicapped me, and it's sort of channeled me into what I do, because I need to watch, listen, and then go away and make it up myself without people examining me. So everything is self-taught pretty much. I will have somebody show me how to use a chainsaw, how to start a chainsaw that's tricky to start, or all of those. But this human form is totally intuitive. You look at it and it doesn't feel balanced. It doesn't feel right. The shoulder is too clunky. It's too heavy, and you just keep paring it back until you feel that it sings. I remember when I first did these torsos, I think I had 5 pieces of elm, and I didn't want to be too explicit. I wanted to be slightly abstract, so I didn't want them to be perfect. They've become much more refined and much more recognisable as I've gone along. And there was this one, so at some angles they were just a tree. You looked around and suddenly you'd see that there was a curve of a back or a shoulder or something, but they weren't explicitly a human form. One of those pieces I barely had to touch. It was so like a human form. Now, all the others sold, but this one that was almost completely a human form without me touching it didn't sell. And it sat in my workshop, and I kept sitting having my lunch looking at it and pondering, and there was something uncomfortable about it. And it was because the proportions weren't quite right. Now, there is a term somebody was telling me the other day, and of course I've forgotten it. A human likes to see something that's recognisably, in this case, a male human form, or they like to see abstraction. There is a midpoint where you've got this slightly, clunky is a bad word to use, but this midpoint that is not quite human, but not quite abstract. And apparently it's been recognised in like AI generated images, where AI is learning, obviously, and you get these 6 fingers or whatever that in the early days of ChatGPT, and there is a discomfort for the viewer. So I sort of just came to this conclusion that the reason is it looked like it had some sort of huge neck or something. I couldn't. So I ended up reworking this piece and made it much more explicitly human, and it's sold like that. So I've slowly become more explicit, and I like to leave, like this piece we're looking at now, as you slowly move up the erect straight arm, at the top it just returns to the tree unmachined. So one of my influences is, these beautiful Grecian and Roman bronzes that they'll pull out of the Adriatic. They're all encrusted with sea barnacles and things. So you can see sort of part of Apollo, but there's that, it's all distorted. I'm sort of always thinking about those when I'm working. So I'm trying to leave some of the original tree there, but also working it back so it is a human form. And you're sort of playing with that pareidolia where you sort of spot faces in clouds or something. It's playing with that, so it's not absolutely a human form.
I just think it's lovely the way it's turned into your nature. The trees has turned into a human form. You've never made a car.
No,
it just couldn't possibly be. It takes on the human body so well.
It does.
And these lines,
those slits,
muscles.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that is that pareidolia effect, where your brain is filling those gaps in and making it such. I've hinted at that human form enough that it's firing up that pareidolia instinct that a human brain has got, and it's filling in all the gaps for you. Stunning. And I love that. I love that because it's like looking at a beautiful impressionistic painting, and you're really close up to it, and you can see all these daubs of paint that are very abstract. And you take a few paces back, and all of a sudden, it's the lilies on the and that playing with that balance between abstract, and then suddenly it all falls into place, and it is something that you recognise.
It's interesting for me personally. If this was exactly like this, 100% the same, but made of stone, it wouldn't have the same impact on me. There's because one can feel the energy within it, and I think part of that is, as you say, we're assigning that energy because we know it's wood, we know it's a living tree. Now, I guess you could argue that stone at some point. Is there anything living about stone? I don't know.
I've never enjoyed using stone because it is very, very dead.
Yeah.
You're looking at millennia, whereas even though this tree is very ancient, it's 6,000 years old, you can still feel the wind that has affected it. You can still see in the grain how it's grown, and it's a living thing still. And it's, I don't know, it sounds kooky, but you feel spirit within it. Whereas stone, and I'm absolutely certain that other people will completely disagree, and that's fair enough. But to me, when I handle stone, it has no spirit. And I can't get over the fact that we're ripping the bones of the earth out, whereas wood is freely given. It costs nothing to the planet to give us.
So, could you explain whether this is the actual colour that it emerged from the bog, that you received it, or whether in polishing it it's taken on this sheen, or whether it's varnished or stained, or...
So again, if you're not looking at an image of it, it is coal. It looks like coal. It's black. It has a shine and a
People
sheen.
will be looking at an image.
If they're not, seek it out.
Yeah.
Yes, so the colour is completely natural. That is the colour that the timber has gone in its 6,000 years of laying submerged in an anaerobic environment. Oak is very rich in tannins. Tannins react with metals, and what you'll find is in an oak tree, if it's had like a fence staple or even a bit of shrapnel from the war embedded into it as it's growing, when that's milled up, you'll find these incredible blue streaks running top to bottom where the steel has reacted with the tannin acids in the tree, and it's spread through and stained the wood. I mean, obviously, if you're a furniture maker, you hate it, but it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. So I'm imagining that the tannin acids has worked with the silts, which obviously this is Wealden, so you've got lots of iron ore. And I mean, I'm no scientist, I don't know this, these are my assumptions, but that tannin acid has worked with the sediments and it has stained the wood very black. Now it has got a sheen on it, but literally when you chainsaw this stuff off, the cut marks shine. It's the most extraordinary wood, and I think partly it's because
it's a form of polishing, isn't it? That speed of cutting.
Well, you don't see that in a piece of wood. It's utterly matte when you cut a piece of wood with a chainsaw. So it was strikingly different when you chainsaw it and you get that
dense,
shine.
You think?
I think it is. I think that is, definitely that's part of it. I wonder if it's because it's basically been marinating in silts for 6,000 years.
Yeah.
I think it's partially mineralised. It's not. It is still wood, but you notice that the edge of your tools it doesn't damage the air. It's not like hitting a staple in a piece of wood where you wreck your chainsaw. But it dulls the edge quite quickly, and I think it's got a lot of silt within the cellular structure of the wood, so it acts as like an emery paper on the edge of your.
Okay.
And I wonder if it also helps to give it a sheen. I have given it a wipe over with linseed oil because it does dull down quite quickly, and I want that human skin-like luster. So I do always give it the lightest coat of linseed oil just to give it that luster.
The stand, we shouldn't ignore the stand.
No.
What is the wood you've chosen?
So that is one of my favourite woods. It is elm, and elm is the most beautiful figurative wood.
Gorgeous, isn't it?
It is stunning. And what I do is I just gently toast it, what happens is, so a bit of elm doesn't have that. It has the figuring, but the contrast between the light and the dark is where I've lightly scorched it. And what happens is I think there are concentrated starches within the fibres of the wood, and that changes depending on the structure of the wood. So those starches burn quicker. So you get these very stratifying lines, and then it's oiled.
So within the United Kingdom, we've suffered a great deal of elm loss. Just a few pockets left, aren't
Absolutely,
there? So these elms that have been cut down and stored? Or?
Yeah, well, so we are sadly, the last pocket of the mature elms in Britain was basically from Eastbourne to Brighton. And they were there because the Downs was protecting them from the north and the sea to the south. But unfortunately, the Dutch elm disease beetle is now in the areas, and the local authorities are trying to fell diseased trees, because the whole cycle is the elm beetle grazes on fresh elm leaves. Yeah. Now it's got like this punk quiff, and it's come out of a dead elm tree, and it's brought with it the spores of a fungus. And when it grazes on that fresh growth, it introduces those spores to the tree, and it's the fungus that spreads through the tree, and actually the tree kills itself. It's trying to stop the spread of this fungus, so it shuts down the capillaries to stop it spreading, but it actually just strangles itself and dies. Unfortunately, as it then dies, the water pressure within the tree drops, and the beetle is able to bore through into the bark and lay its eggs inside. So when those eggs pupate and turn into beetles and fly out, they then take the fungi on. So so what happens is, when a tree shows signs of dying, what the local authorities try and do is remove it very quickly so the beetles don't have a chance to lay on it. So I'm, in effect, there's an ill wind that blows no good. I get my hands on a lot of elm because we have still got street trees. I think these pieces have come from Seaford, I think, but there's a couple of torsos over there that are Brighton street trees, but it is the most beautiful, beautiful wood, and it's stunning.
Your other torsos at the back, which is hard to describe, obviously, but they're all elm. So the whole thing's around those ones.
So we're in the studio at the moment.
Yeah.
And there's the key work, but there are another 4
pieces.
So those red ones,
the
tawny red ones, they are elm and they are pollards.
Okay.
And then those 2 black ones are more bog oak. Now the plinths that the elm ones sit on, that is just burnt oak.
Okay.
So it looks similar to bog oak. It's black, but it's burnt and oiled.
You spend a lot of time also doing wood
engraving.
Wood engraving. Tell us about those.
I fell into it by accident. I had a book bought for me that had about 6 wood engravings in, and it said in the fly sheet or the cover that these were wood engravings, and it was like, how on earth are these incredibly fine black and white images from wood? It made no sense to me, and I bought a book, English Country Traditions, and it was full of wood engravings by a wood engraver called Chris Wormel, and that was it. I was completely in love. I just loved what I was seeing, and by a bizarre series of accidents I ended up sitting in a class with this beautiful woman, Diana Bloomfield. She was getting really frail then, and I in fact was her last student. And she basically just spent about a quarter of an hour going, right, this tool does this, and you have different tools which make different marks, and she just rattled through them really quick. I remember she said, do you know what a snake's head fritillary is? I went, oh yeah, they're lovely. And for people that don't know what a snake's head fritillary is, it's a little spring bell-like flower, and on the back of the petals it has this checkerboard.
Yeah.
So she had this tiny little square scorper, it's called, and she cut a little checkerboard on the block of wood, and she basically gave me her tools, gave me a block, and allowed me just to disappear off into the corner and got on with it. And there's a wood engraver called Andy English, and in his biography he talks about when he learned to wood engrave, he said it felt like remembering rather than learning. And for me that was exactly the same. It felt like I was remembering, and I was always, you know what it's like when you pick up a new skill, you get so frustrated because you feel so ham-fisted and it's so frustrating. Well, I was always good enough that the dopamine hit just about was above that frustration. So I was able to forever just pour myself into it without being burnt up with frustration. And 30 years later, I am still trying to get to grips with it, but it is something I absolutely love. And it's got this real, Thomas Bewick in the late 1700s created this art form pretty much on his own, and he was a country boy. He basically did these incredible books that have been unsurpassed to this day, but they were all very rural. So he had like the history of the quadrupeds, the British birds, and within these books there were these scatterings of these beautiful vignettes which were very biographical. They were very rural, hunting, shooting, fishing, building a snowman that was parodying the vicar of the parish. And basically that is the foundation of wood engraving. So it has this rural genesis which just spoke to me, to my absolute roots. And that is sort of how I got into wood engraving.
How does our audience engage, see, hopefully purchase?
Come to me. Yeah. So, if you Google Keith Pettit, you will find my website, which is, I must admit, a little neglected, but I'm quite an avid social media. For my sins, there's a lot on Instagram, but I also love Blue Sky, which is like this new Twitter replacement. So you can find, and I'm always posting basically work in progress is what I post. So you'll find me quite easily by Googling me.
And then you go out to, because where I saw this work was in an open house.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, on an annual basis, what kind of gallery exhibitions or open houses or that you might take your works to.
So I'm always on the lookout for new opportunities, obviously, but things like Brighton open houses. We're now at the end of May, and that's just come to an end, which is always a brilliant time. It's very rare that I'm not taking part in that in some way, shape or form. I have exhibitions here at the workshop regularly in East Oathley. Lewis Artwave has, for me, is one of the reasons that I was able to make it as an artist. You know, that was sort of one of the big first breaks that I got. I had a little exhibition I was invited to in Lewis, and people were buying my work. It was nice, wow. This is extraordinary.
Where does that take place?
So that's now set as always like the first 3 weekends in September, and it's all Lewis District. And for the last 5 years, and certainly as far as I'm aware, in the future, I hire Hamsey Church, which is just to the north of Lewis. It is the most beautiful place. It's totally isolated.
It's fantastic.
There's no services.
Nice.
It is stunning, and I get to sit up there for 3 weeks, and I just love it. And that's where you'll find me in September, and then the year then turns and it's bonfire, and I build a bonfire sculpture every year, so that's sort of up until November, and then it's the Christmas shows that you sort of get.
Let's not skirt past that too quickly, because your bonfire sculptures are amazing.
Brilliant.
They're like Tibetan sand artworks, which an extraordinary amount of work goes into them, and they're just
it's weeks
destroyed,
weeks and weeks of work, and it's why I'm an artist. So I spent nearly 40 years trying not to be an artist, because that's not an honest way to earn a living. It's not for the likes of us. You know, that's people with means become artists. So, you know, I pursued sign writing because that was an honest trade, and I battled trying to make that work. I'm a rubbish businessman, so it was always an uphill struggle. I was always broke, but very, very unhappy. My only dream was to earn enough money that I could build the business big enough that I could hire somebody to work for me, and I could take winters off and paint winter trees on the skyline. That was the only ambition I really ever had, which sort of, you know, it was all there. I just refused to look at it. And then obviously the wood engraving started, but that was only just to find out really. At that point it hadn't grown. And then I have been involved in my village bonfire society all my life. My dad has been involved all his life. So it was sort of something I didn't have a choice in. And it is very tribal, it is very competitive. And we had this huge bonfire that was just took weeks to get rid of. And it was costing us more and more. So the decision was made to, right, we're going to do away with this. We're just going to build a little pallet stack and save ourselves all this problem, which was brilliant because, you know, you didn't have to almost work until Christmas to clear the blooming thing up. But it was a bit boring. So I was sort of looking at this thinking, this is really boring. And I want to compete and I want to be the best. So why don't we turn it into a theme?
Love it.
So just with some friends, we just started playing around, and it grew really, really quickly. And it was only really then working with my friends to build these things that I realised at nearly 40 years old, I was actually an artist, because nobody else could see it. And literally until we sort of nailed the last bit on and stood back, that it made sense to everybody else. And just working with all my mates, it was like, oh God, this is who I am actually. So it was really that.
What was the first one? What was the?
It was a Native American Indian chief.
Is that with the?
No, that was a very recent one. That was the Robin Hood was a couple of years ago. So I think it was 20 years I've been doing, 20 years this last year I think. So the first one was an Indian chief, and then I made St George no, I didn't. It was 2005, and I made HMS Victory.
Amazing.
Are these on your website to see photographs?
They will be.
They should be.
They should be.
They're going to be next
I
week.
don't think they are. The trouble is,
anyone taking down their fence knows where to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
one year, a villager came on. Keith, we've got an old wooden sailing dinghy. Can we throw it on the fire? And we'd almost finished the fire that year. I can't remember what it was then. And I went, I'll tell you what, keep hold of it. I'll have it next year. And so I turned it into a scale model of a galleon, and then built this huge sea monster biting it.
Oh, so good.
We get all sorts.
Do you love watching it burn? Do you actually do you get something from that?
People always ask me about, don't you hate seeing it burn? And the thing is, I always built them as a bonfire.
Yeah,
they were nothing.
It's the feeling that you get from watching it burn.
There is a drama there. There is a drama.
It has to burn to be
the piece.
Absolutely.
I
often joke we'd only have standing room in the village if we didn't burn. No, I don't mind that at all.
No,
it's part of it.
Yeah, good.
I have a question, which is maybe the last question, but for me, maybe Laura has some. But you mentioned Diane. So we're often dealing with Rembrandt at the National Gallery or Matisse at MoMA. And I'm always complaining about the lack of good arts programs on television. But that's that kind of one level, if you like, of art. But what we come across fairly often, of course, here we are in this relatively small village, and there's you here, fantastic sculptor. Next door, you were telling me there's a fantastic photographer. You described him as one of the best photographers in the world.
I would say so, in my opinion.
Diane, you mentioned having. I remember in one of the articles I read about you, you talked about her being probably the best teacher you'd ever had.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, do you feel that these skills and these, that there are so many great artists who maybe it's a struggle. We struggle in what we do, but it's a struggle. But actually, it's very active, and that people should go to their local art shows in Brighton and in Lewis and wherever they might be in the United Kingdom, in the United States, wherever you're listening to this, because there's so much great art. And no matter what our governments do, it's not a great time in the United States in that respect. But actually, artists will find a way. I think yes, absolutely, artists will find a way, because it's not some sort of choice to be an artist. I think you are, and I have made myself very ill by trying not to be an artist. Properly dark times, because I was not being an artist. So it's sort of not really a choice. And absolutely, I'm going to encourage everybody to go and visit a little local show, a little local gallery, because without those people visiting, I go very, very, very hungry. So absolutely, it does feel, I've worked in Europe pre-Brexit, sadly, a lot. And the attitude certainly in Germany is so different to art. It's so much more democratic. Everybody feels that they are and can be patrons and have art in their lives. Whereas in the UK, it feels like as soon as you can't be interested in art and normal. It feels like, that's for the elites. That's for rich people. It's not for the likes of me. And that's not for me. Is that phrase which I have to always argue when someone says that.
And as I say, for 40 years, I tried not to be an artist because I'm working class. I come from not a lot. My dad's a tradesman. My mum was a nurse. My forebears are farming stock. That is not art. Is not for us.
That's how we started the podcast.
Okay.
Because Phil, so we ended up, we did it in COVID, and Phil sort of knows what he knows. He's like, Laura, come on, we'll do this podcast. I'm like, well, I don't know anything about. I mean, I was one of these people that would be nervous to go into the National Gallery.
You'll be judged.
Judged, 100%.
And you're a bit thick.
100%.
You're not sophisticated enough for art.
When I make a comment sometimes, and it's like, well, I don't even know what I'm saying, but then you should be allowed to say something.
But isn't it fundamentally, I totally understand that, Laura, and I am completely 100% with you. But, and to anybody else listening, and probably you're not going to listen to this because art's not for you, which is sad, because actually it's about that reaction within you, and to be moved by something physically that another person has made is a really, I think it's almost a fundamental thing within us as beings, that we resonate to creativity, and we celebrate creativity. And this country is so sad that somehow, and I would guess it's because we've never had a revolution, that there is this hierarchical class system in this country that has largely excluded the majority from that enjoyment. And I think we as a nation are vastly poorer for that. And it's not cool to like art.
No.
In my friendship group and the guys who I know, I'm totally on my own.
Right. That's interesting.
And everybody sort of looks slightly askance at me, because it's not what they recognise, and it's this breeding. It's really sad that people are missing out on that emotional response to a thing. It really is sad.
Yeah.
Some of the nicest comments we get about the films is when somebody has finally gone to see the film. They might have been taken by somebody, or it's an artist. They said, for whatever reason, they've finally gone, and they'll say, I was surprised. I didn't think it was for me, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Same with the podcast. We get these kind of comments on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, I was in the car and someone else put it on, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's like, well, why? What is it through our parents or through our schooling where it's just not part of?
I think it's societal.
It's societal.
And you're battling against a strong tide there.
You are.
It's very interesting to conclude, but even when you look at Caravaggio, there are certain moments when art becomes really kind of democratized. There's a period in Dutch history where 5 million, Dutch Golden Age, 5 million paintings, because people wanted art on their walls. Not religious art, they wanted kind of still lives or
domestic
scenes,
street scenes.
Think Vermeer. And then you get that mid-19th century in Paris again. But actually, 1600s Rome, all of a sudden art is not just for the cardinals and the popes and the dukes, but actually the barbers. The barbers are buying art, and shopkeepers are buying art. This is really important for Caravaggio, because when he starts out, he's making these still lives for this broader audience.
Okay.
And there's no embarrassment about having these artworks. It's funny, when I look back, almost to my surprise, I think actually my parents did have, it was obviously all copies, but they did have artworks on their wall, but we never went to galleries, I don't think. No. A formative moment for me, which I may have mentioned before in one of the podcasts, was we lived in Macclesfield up in the north of England, just outside the town, and my mum and I used to walk everywhere. We walked into town, and along the way there was a little park, and in the park was a little museum, gallery. And we went in there, and in there was all these kind of glass, not vitrines, are they called vitrines? Anyway, display cabinets.
Yes, yep.
With bits of dinosaur bone and bits of Roman vase. And actually, even as a young, I must have been 6 or 7, I was like, really, that's where my love of history came from. Because I was like, wow.
Yeah.
It still needed my mum to take me in the first place, and not walk straight past it. And when we made our film recently about the National Gallery, which was predominantly people who worked at the National Gallery telling us their favourite paintings. And the whole point of this was to say everyone can have an opinion on art, and can it doesn't have to be curators and the director, and it was very much about this. One, they were so articulate, and it was amazing. There were beautiful stories. Two, what was really interesting was how much personal biography you bring to your choice of your favourite painting. Yeah. But the third key point, and this came up over and over again, in fact we couldn't include it every time, was my nan brought me, my dad brought me, my school brought me, and I'm shocked. I mean, when I tell people I'm making a film about Caravaggio, okay, maybe it's not so surprising, or even Leonardo or Raphael, people say, who's that? How could you not have heard of Leonardo?
Yeah. I feel but you have to... I didn't. You have to seek it out to know it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that sort of inspiration, that original inspiration for me, there was lots and lots of little stepping stones. But I remember one of the really early forms. I've always loved history. I've always loved my local landscape. I've always loved the stories of the landscape. But one of the real inspirations was we went this wonderful walk at school on the Downs out of Alfriston. We walked out to Berwick Church. I was taken to Berwick Church. I didn't know anything about the Bloomsbury Group, was nowhere near on my radar. Charleston Farmhouse, never heard of it. But I just walked into this church and was told this story about the war, which I was obsessed with, blew the windows out. They got some local artists to paint the walls. And I looked up and there's this nativity scene and that guy's an RAF and he's back on leave from the war, and this guy's and his family were taxi drivers in Lewis, and look, that sheep there, that's a Sussex sheep, and there's a truck, and that crook, that's a Sussex crook, and it's like, so my world that I love, Firle Beacon in the background of this nativity scene, is in art. And there was this connection there then. Fantastic. And it was only a school trip. Yeah. And we was probably in there no more than 10 minutes. Yeah. But that connection, that interweaving of art and my world that I loved was one of those really formative moments that sort of has led the three of us to sit here talking about this.
Exactly. Isn't that lovely?
Last question. You mentioned about a 31-mile Hastings. Is it a sculpture walk?
Yes, very cool.
And the sculptures are still there?
Yes, permanently there until they rot and fall down. So I was commissioned by Rother District Council with one of the last grants from the EU to turn the 1066 country walk into a sculpture trail. And it goes from Pevensey Castle to Rye. And it's like, 1066 for me was so a huge part of my childhood, because I grew up in Howsham, which was sacked by William. I went swimming in Norman's Bay, where William landed. I went on school trips and did a whole school term project on Pevensey Castle, which was a Roman castle which William fortified. It's in my world that I've grown up in. Every field that we drove past as a child, you could imagine something would have gone on there. Being taken to the battlefield as a kid. And so having this project was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. So basically I spent the whole of COVID working on that project, and it was nearly 3 years by the time I'd finished it. And I did 10 different sculptures along the 31 miles, and all of them were trying to lean into the 1066 story, but also more local history. Things like, there's a whole sculpture about Norman loanwords. So the reason we call a cow in a field but beef on our plate is it's an absolute legacy of the conquest. Right. Because the consumers of that meat were the French elite, and they called it bœuf. But the guys that worked in the field continued to call it the Germanic Saxon name. And there's so many of these words: flower and blossom, archer and bowman, venison and deer, pork and pig.
Okay.
And these are so one sculpture was all about that, and I love. So that was a hollow elm trunk, and I pierce cut it to look like the trees from the Bayeux Tapestry. But then in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, the night before the battle, Harold met his army under the grey apple tree. And so I planted just a wild-grown Sussex-sourced apple tree within this sculpture, and hopefully it'll just slowly envelop the sculpture. As the sculpture dies, the apple tree will take over. There's a henge which again is all Bayeux Tapestry inspired sculptures, but they're tree guards, and within the tree guards I've planted a grove of hawthorn. So eventually it will just be a grove of hawthorn, and you can get white to red blossom. So I planted 2 white, 2 pink, 2 red. So hopefully there'll be like this beautiful colour fade. It was
we were talking about on the way over. We'd love to do it, wouldn't we?
It
should
was
do this.
So it's the 1066 walk.
1066.
Are you the
walk.
only sculptor on it?
It was.
And they're basically every 3 miles apart, more or less.
Yeah, they are slightly unequalled, but it was just sort of where we could get permissions, really, more than.
bit of a detail, but can you cycle it, or is it?
I think, yes, it is possible to be cycling. I'm sure I did. One of the early researchers cycled it initially, so I think it is cyclable.
Fantastic. Keith, it's been
brilliant.
absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Bless you. Thank you.
The artwork
It's so
is
good.
absolutely gorgeous,
Yeah.
as is all the work here. Thoroughly recommend people look you up, find out when you're next exhibiting, or if you're here, come by and have a look.
Yeah.
And keep on doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at 7th-art.com or contact us by emailing info@7th-art.com. See you next time.